Rick, thank you for having a Zoom call with me. We've known each other for a couple of years. We connected on LinkedIn back in fall of 2018, and you signed up for my course in the fall of 2018 as well. And you signed up for Job Search Mastery. And just wanted to talk to you again because you recently you've been searching for a job for a couple of years now, or at least you're actively looking for a couple of years. And you recently had a really interesting, everything sort of turned around very quickly for you. And you had two enthusiastic offers from companies, one from one of the companies that you actually wanted to work for. And you wanted to work for it for a while. And it all turned around very fast because you wrote a post, literally, this is January 28th, 2021. You wrote a post just over a week ago, right?
Correct.
Over a week ago, last Monday, and saying that you had applied for positions and you were sent rejection letters saying that you were overqualified, and we talked about some things that you could do to get them to see, to see if you could progress in your interview, and you did. Ended up securing interviews and got the offers. So let's start there. Let's start from last week and just kind of walk us through what sort of transpired through that, and talk about the jobs that you applied for and how things transpired from there to actually the offers.
Okay. Actually, I had two initial interviews with two companies, two manufacturing companies. And in one of those interviews, one of the managers brought up or asked me if I would be bored with a supervisor position that I applied for, given my background.
Yeah.
And, that kind of took me back. But I explained to him that person in my position, I prefer to come in, and it was changing fields. It's going into food production, which I've never done food production, that there's no better way to learn how to do that and what's going on than being on the line and supervising those people on the line. And that way I would get a bigger picture of the company right away by having hands-on. And I'm a hands-on manager anyhow. In the same time, I get a letter from a HR firm trying to fill a position, asking me if I'm overqualified and if I was happy with the amount of money they were asking. So I thought, okay, it kind of took me back. I have this boring question out of the blue, and I have this HR person asking me if I'm telling me I'm overqualified for a supervisor position and if I'm okay with the money. So it kind of, and hence the post on LinkedIn, I threw it out there and yeah, I am overqualified, but a person in my position understands what they're applying for and the money involved in what they're applying for, and really is looking for an opportunity to get in the door, show their skill set and ability and move on up. But also really as a hands-on manager, it's a great opportunity to get that hands-on experience. And I think, it helps you become more valuable to that company right away.
Right.
So once I grasped where the HR and hiring managers were having a stumbling block with me and overcame that stumbling block, everything just started opening up. Right. And within 72 hours, I had two job offers on the table, and a third one had pushed me on to the on-site interview, and we were waiting for the on-site HR manager to set up an interview.
Right.
And even since then, I've gotten a couple calls
of
interest. Yeah. Okay. Just this morning, I got one from a mortgage company, believe it or not, saying, okay, you don't have the experience that for what you applied for, but looking at your resume, I want to talk to you because I got some other ideas.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then there's, of course, the one we had talked to, that started last fall, back in October, for a plant manager position. Out of the blue this week, he sent me LinkedIn message saying, hey, we haven't filled the position,
Yeah.
and maybe moving forward soon. And I hadn't heard from those people in 2 months.
Wow. So a
So
lot. So this has been a very eventful week for you.
yes.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know about the mortgage company, but I knew about the others.
Well, that just happened this morning.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
that's amazing. So, there are a lot of folks who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who, have have are in their job search because of the things that are happening, especially this COVID, the global pandemic that's happening. Companies
Yeah.
have had to lay people off. Businesses have gone down. Other businesses in this industries are coming up. I mean, in your case is a clear indication that hiring hasn't stopped, right? So there is still some activity there. There is still something that some companies looking to hire, looking to grow, looking to do things, and what have you. What would you say what advice would you give to folks in their um, you're in your late 50s, or you hit
I'm
60?
60.
So you hit 60. So
Yep.
you're 60. You had two enthusiastic job offers. You've been actively searching you've been out of work for about a year, right?
14 months.
14 months. But you were actively searching for a couple of years now.
Correct.
Um, and so for other folks who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, looking for work, going through their ups and downs of applying for jobs and getting rejections and what have you, what advice would you give them now that you know some of the objections, some of the realities of what hiring leaders struggle with when it comes to looking at people who are overqualified? Oh,
Well, yeah, the big thing for me was that eye opener last week. You always knew HR people were subjective. So you got to keep in the back of your mind while you're submitting this and we don't know this, is what has influenced their decision making when they look at a candidate.
mm-hmm.
So the main thing is getting your foot in the door there, and you got to think about that HR person sitting there reading your resume and cover letter. Is what are they looking for in the candidate? And in my case, of course, it's the operations leadership,
Yeah.
and sticking with that selling point to get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the clarity, but then also this boredom, slash pay
Mm-hmm.
um, objection that I never really even thought of. I thought somebody would be like totally enthusiastic looking at my resume and saying, wow, we could have this person in a supervisor role, and for this money, what a great opportunity. Let's jump at it. And here they're not jumping at it because they're thinking I'm going to leave in 6 months, or I'm going to get bored, and that just never occurred to me because I thought you'd want the best person for the least amount of money.
Right.
That mentality. But it's very strong out there. I was beginning to think age was the reason why I wasn't getting hired, but now after this experience, it wasn't age, it was the boredom and the what they perceived as I should be getting more money.
Yeah.
And once you talk to the people and make them understand that you understand what the pay is and you're okay with that, you're in this point in your life
Yeah.
that amount of money is good for you.
Yeah.
And but also you want I made a strong point that okay, I'm getting in there, I have all these skill sets, and I used my example with Alltech
Mm-hmm.
on overcoming this objection, where I went in there as a maintenance coordinator. I
Yeah.
didn't have hiring or firing ability. I just coordinated the maintenance guys each day and pointed them in the right direction.
Yeah.
And a new plant manager comes in, sees my skill set, and puts me sole in charge of every capital improvement project we
Yeah.
had at Alltech. And so there I became a project manager, did over $20 million in improvements.
Yeah.
And I saw those projects from start to finish and got corporate approval.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of you opened their eyes into, wow, maybe we bring him in as a supervisor, but maybe we use him over here and do this. And maybe we use him over there and do this.
Yes.
So they started getting excited
Yes.
about the possibilities of having me on board, and
Yes.
other, especially if they're future thinkers.
Yes.
So, especially the hiring manager or the plant manager or director or whatever really thinks ahead in
Yes.
the future, and he's seeing these capabilities and
Yes.
getting excited.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? I mean, when you really know what you have to offer, um, because others, people are going to devalue you, people are going to underestimate you, people are going to diminish as much as possible because, like my comment said in your when I responded to your post, HR folks, recruiters have their marching orders, right? Like they're given parameters and they're told to stick within those parameters. They don't really have they're not connected to the hiring leader per se in terms of really understanding what the hiring leader really truly needs beyond just the role, right? They just understand what the hiring leader needs for that specific role. So that's their marching orders. So they will cut off, talent and what have you. And really the key thing, the important thing that you did, and the thing that I think folks in their 40s, 50s, and 60s should really pay attention to and do is hop on the phone, talk to
Yes.
them, right? Talk to them, and just say, like you have, you've got certain talents and skill sets and experiences that could be of value to the leader, that maybe it's worth exploring, that what you have to offer may help the leader do and achieve other things. They may want to be able to use you for whatever is maybe coming ahead that they haven't thought through and they haven't reflected in the role per se, right? But it's sort of on the plate. There's always, a company is one thing that you've learned from me from Job Search Mastery is, the hiring leader is always has needs,
Yes.
and it doesn't necessarily always materialize into job postings, but to really understand the psychology of the hiring leader. So what are their triggers? What are their emotional what is their emotional scale, so to speak, right? Their triggers and their the things that they think about, the things that they feel, everything from frustration to aspiration, right? And
Yeah.
when you have a good understanding about that, then it's easier for you to have a conversation with the leader in a way that makes sense, that helps them understand that you have something to offer them that could be of benefit to them. And so I really like the fact that you used the story about Alltech, because what you've demonstrated there is look, I will help you with a certain set of tasks, and that's all. If that's all you need me to do is these sets of tasks, great. But when you walk in, you're like, and not everyone does this. I mean, this is a quality that you have for sure, not something that every person has. But the minute you walk in, you're like, well, I'm not just going to stick to my job, but I'm going to look at what else I can do. Look, oh, there's
Right.
these things that I can do. Look, there's ways that we can improve. So your focus goes from just doing your job to having an impact on the business, right? What can I do to improve operations? What can I do to impact the business and stuff? And that was a critical message for you in all of your marketing, especially when it comes to being an operations leader. That these are your driving factors. You want people to really get that this is who you are and this is what you do. So that example, that story of Alltech is something that gets people to do it, and you actually experienced it. You saw their eyes light up, and it's like, because the minute they hear that, their imagination goes, right? They're like, wow, okay, this is this is somebody who we can use. This is somebody who can help us because,
Yep.
right at the
Well,
end of
and
the, sorry.
it's interesting once you experience this,
Yeah.
and once I brought that example up, I could see the wheels turning in their head.
Isn't that
You
a
know,
beautiful sight?
yes, and you can start. They kind of get this look in their face,
Yeah.
and you're like, yeah, they're already thinking about what else they can get me involved in.
Yeah. That's the magical look. You achieve
Yeah,
that look, then it's you just sit back and you're like, you know what, we can do some real good work here together
yeah,
because you get to see, I know me, meaning you know you, right? But now you helped the leader understand the value you have to offer, but also the real potential of what working together would mean in terms of the outcomes that they want, right? So um, that is an accomplishment on its own. So a good job on that. Um,
the other thing I would point out as a
yeah.
person in that position, at my age at 60, the hiring manager is typically in their 40s.
Oh, okay.
And the other thing I wanted to take off the table is I wasn't coming in there to take their job,
Right.
but I wanted to learn their job
Yeah.
so that if God forbid something happened to them, or if they wanted to take a month off and not worry about their job, I
Yeah.
could step in and everything would be fine when they came back. It would be taken care of.
Yeah. Is was that when you were speaking with the hiring leaders or whoever you were interviewing with, the leadership teams or the recruitment teams, um, was it a concern? Like was your um, flight risk a concern? Meaning, if you came in at whatever role you came in, but then say you found out later on that you found a role that was a little bit more fitting at your level, that you would leave them, move over to that role. Like, is that something that was that an objection that came up at any point?
Um, it was, and I'm trying to think of which company that was with. But yes, that was a concern, and I think it was underlying concern actually with all three of them.
Okay.
And for me, um, I expressed that the job search isn't fun. It's not something I want to be involved in, and would hope I don't have to be involved in it again. When I join a company, I bring passion to the job and become passionate about the company. And I want to stay there and just grow within that culture.
Yeah.
So it is something that you need to address,
Yeah.
because I think in the back of their mind they're like, well, as soon as the better opportunity comes, he's going to
Yes.
jump and take it. And like for the one job I did accept, it's literally 15 minutes away from my house. It's the
Right.
only major manufacturing facility in my city
Okay.
here nearby. Anything else I need to travel 30 minutes to before I
Right.
get to other manufacturing facilities. So for them, I took that off the table, just saying that you're in my community.
Yeah.
It's literally right outside my neighborhood, and now I'll be a part of this community,
Yeah.
working in it, and that took it off the table for them.
Yeah. So you express to them that you're not just committed to finding the right level and the right job and the perfect fit, but you're really committing to the company.
Correct.
And that's it's important. It's important that leaders, hiring leaders, recruitment teams, they get that because if they don't get that from your conversations and what have you, they that's a red flag. That's a risk that is alive and well, and it's real. And it's if you don't address it head on, it influences what they do. It influences their decisions, and we don't want that.
Right.
So Okay, so let's talk about. I've got a few things that I want to talk about here. Um, Now, just like anyone who's in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they have a wide variety of experiences. Um, One thing that when folks are watching this, if they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they're like, well, yes, I mean, yes, you've had a nice progressive career growth and what have you. And the truth is you've had a variety of experiences. I mean, you
Yes.
started your career in engineering, then you got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. Um, Day one was kind of rough for you, so to speak, of your entrepreneurial journey. Um, but you built a business, a very successful business, and you worked in it for 15 years, not engineering related, it was lawn care. Then you started another business, and then you got into a few other jobs here and there, but they eventually ended up at Alltech and then Green Horse.
Correct.
Um, so you've had engineering, you have your entrepreneurship experience. Talk a little bit about making that switch from a job to entrepreneurial, and what did you really get out of the entrepreneurial experience?
Well, at Newport Shipyard, I was started off as a test engineer. So
Yeah.
that was overseeing trades, union trades to build the nuclear propulsion plants on aircraft carriers.
Wow. Yeah.
And I ended there as a liaison engineer between NAVSEA and shipyard engineers.
Yeah.
So if shipyard engineers had a problem on a ship, they came to me, told me what their answer was. I agree or disagreed with the NAVSEA, and we went back to the shipyard and told them what to do.
Yeah.
So um, very engineering, like you said, orientated. At that point in my life, I had gotten my master's degree in engineering management, and I really knew that engineering was a stepping stone for management for me. I really enjoyed leading the trades and directing them each day and being basically a team leader, so to speak. And so that was the push to buy a franchise and become my own manager, business owner. So I did that on the side for 3 years. So growing this business on the side, but that mindset switch, yeah, it was a big change. In that now you are the owner, now you're the one with all the responsibility of what happens in that business on your shoulders, all the
Mhm.
cost, yeah, the hiring, the firing, the customer service, the sales, everything's now on my plate.
Right.
So it was a huge mindset switch in that I had my little engineering world, and now I have everything on the
Yeah.
plate. And luckily doing that on the side for 3 years allowed me to gradually shift into that with the growth of the business. Um, but still a complete mindset. But the under key there was it was management. And, you know, I had that hands-on experience at Shipyard, and that transferred to the hands-on management with the lawn care business.
Yeah.
And the lawn care and being self-employed just allowed me to grow and mature in a business management standpoint, but also in a people management standpoint, but still keeping that same linear common thread of hands-on management involved.
And in your perspective, I mean, it's easy to think that, well, running a lawn care business versus getting a job in a plant, supervising, like plant supervisor, two different industries, two different skill sets, two different aspects,
Right.
but um, there is a common thread, like you said, to its management, it's hands-on, um, but there is a common thread or a common factor that you bring to the table that you were able to, what you've gained from running that business, in building that business, it actually helped position you to perform, uh, perform in a plant supervisor role that you demonstrated back in Alltech, back in Green Horse, and now that you're going to, what you're bringing to your new job, right? Like there is a common thread, there's a common skill set or assets that you bring, that you've built over the years. So even though it's different industries and different set of tasks and different sort of activities, but there's a net positive growth in call it your core assets, which are making an impact on a business, leading people, hands-on in operations, and those are the three things that we really focused on your marketing, especially your resume, and we positioned you, right? We positioned you for your in your resume as someone who has those three primary things, as somebody who makes an impact on business, somebody who's a good people leader, and you understand operations, plant operations, any operation, business operation. You're hands-on. You're about improvement, right? And that's certainly a theme that is sort of like consistent. It's been consistent throughout your career. So, for people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're looking at their career and they've had a wide variety of experiences and stuff, and they're at this point of confusion that, okay, well, I've been everywhere, I've done everything. So, I'm like, what do I do? How do I market myself? What would you suggest that they do?
Hire you. No, and that's where I was at. To be honest with you, was Alltech had closed the plant, so I scrambled, really scrambled to get the position at Green Horse. Kind of looking back, that was almost a matter of luck that I got that position.
Okay.
Where once at Green Horse, I realized my job search was kind of a result of luck, and I saw with this possible merger, that I'd be once again doing it all over, that I needed to change something.
Yeah.
And part of that was, I don't even remember how I found you, to be honest with you, whether it was LinkedIn or on YouTube or something, but I saw your presentation and I was like, this guy's in the same place I was at, or I am at, and at that point. And my problem was, like you said, I've been an engineer, ran a lawn care business, then I ran an import-export business in home decor for wholesale business.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to Alltech and was maintenance coordinator and then a project manager. And then now, at this point, I was a plant manager at a small manufacturing company.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I'm all over the place when somebody's looking at my resume.
Yeah.
And I think I was presenting that in my resume and my cover letters at that point, that I had no clear focus. I was just like shooting that resume out to everybody because, I can do that. I can do this. I've done that. And there was no clear focus there. After going through your course, then we came up with the, operations leadership, and how I had leadership. That was the common thread throughout my whole career.
Yeah.
And once I put that into focus, and then we put that into focus in my resume, things started to turn around at that point.
And it wasn't necessarily easy, right? I mean, it's
oh no,
because you really, when you have a variety of experiences, you have one of the disadvantages that we have, especially for people who do good work, talented people, is the work that you do, right?
Yeah.
The work. I know I can do it. I know what I can do, but sort of shining the light back towards you and saying, okay, let's look at your entire, because we, like in Job Search Master, we talk from everything, like from childhood heroes to
Yeah.
what everything that you've done. We look at everything, right? Because all it is, these are all data points. Like all these experiences that I had are data points. And if you don't necessarily go through all the data points and really go through it, really explore, all these experiences, you don't begin to see the themes.
Right.
But one of the most because so there's work there, and you, by the way, you shared your notes with me, and you put in the work. You really went to town. I got to know you really well. This is why I have such conviction, and I'm really, honestly, whoever hires Rick, you're you're in for a treat, my friends. But I have such conviction and insight into what promise you bring to any company. But after going through, like, reading the stories, reading the things that you've been through, the experiences, without going through that, without really putting it on paper, you get tripped up on a lot of things that you think you could do, or you think you could do, but you don't. It's sort of an imagination, right? It's what
Right.
we do. What we've done is what you did is took it out of your brain, put it on paper, and step back and look at it,
Yeah.
and then say, oh, there's a theme. Oh, there's evidence. You didn't have to make anything up. You were completely authentic. But one of the most beautiful things about doing this is once you start to see the theme and once you see the evidence, is you start to see your value, but you start to really believe in your value, right?
Right.
And you really start to have not I talk about confidence. This is beyond confidence. This is when you see the data and you see your themes and you see your value, you begin to have conviction in your value.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about what you do and what you can do, I mean, there's conviction that comes out of you, right? And it's something that you cannot fake.
Right.
Right? You can't fake it. And it's factual based, it's evidence based, because your conviction is well placed. You've done it. You've earned the things that you've earned the talent that you have over time, year after year, day after day, month after month, and job after job. You've earned it, right? And so once you have that conviction, it's just a matter of leading people to get to see you and understand your value, right? Because, like I said, people are going to underestimate you, they're going to undervalue, they're going to dismiss you, they're going to do all sorts of things, right? Because people have limited, hiring leaders definitely have limited time, limited attention, because they're trying to achieve a bunch of things, right? Recruiting is not something that they're thinking about actively on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's why they have folks to do it for them. And HR folks, recruiters, they have their own marching orders. They have their things they need to do too. So they sort of have to, they're compensated, they're rewarded based on the tasks that they do, based on the work that they get done, the accomplishments. So, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of moving parts there. So your windows of opportunity to get in there are very and have your influence are very minimal. And so the thing that opens up, and the one, what really opens up opportunity for them to stop, pause, and look at you and kind of get that look that we're talking about, that, wheels turning, is when you walk in. Now, it was one thing if you walked in and you shared that story when you were somewhat hesitant and you were unsure about your, what they were looking for and what have you. That wouldn't have fallen on really receptive ears, right? But you believed, that story was just one evidence, one example of what you can do, right? But
Right.
as a very well-placed story, is a very well-placed example that got them to realize that, well, hang on a second, let's take a pause. This is what is sitting in front of you, and the wheels started to turn. It's like, okay, we can do more, and that's how you build the enthusiasm, right?
Yeah.
Once the imagination goes, that's how you build the enthusiasm. But all of that comes back to, first you being clear on your value, right? Having some consistency, having some focus, having some direction, some conviction. Once you have direction, once you have focus, then having conviction and believing in yourself, because that has to happen first before others can believe you can do anything for them. right?
Yeah. Well, and you have that part in your series where you do those stories.
Yes.
And it was interesting. I would have thought franchise of the year would have been the big story in my career, but it wasn't. It was the year before I got most improved franchise of the year.
Yeah.
And when the vice president of franchising handed that to me, it was because, my mom had become ill. I had to leave the business for a month and be by my mom and dad's side to make the difficult decisions.
Yeah.
And my people took over for that month.
Yeah.
And, the vice president handed me the award and said, "This is because you have developed your people to be leaders."
Yeah.
And, once I started telling that story, then it really turned the table in a lot of these interviews. And, I went on to the second and third interview,
Yeah.
with that story because I had proof that I had developed leaders.
Right.
And so, and so had I not gone through that process of
Yeah.
writing down all those stories, all those milestones in my career, I would have never thought of that story to use in an interview, but I had that as a bullet now to
Right.
use.
Right. That's fantastic, because that's um, when you're telling your stories, and the message that you're communicating through your stories, um, it's not really just, it's not showing off for you, but
No,
what you are doing is you're letting them know, you're helping them, essentially. You're helping them understand, again, what you could do for them. But it also comes from a place of really clear vision and view on your side, on your place, or in your seat, that you understand what they need, right? I mean, it's a great puff story that, hey, I got franchise of the year, I built a business, got franchise of the year. It's a great puff piece for you. It's good for you, right? But how does it help the person who you are sharing that story with? And so that's why you shared that story of most improved, because here's what I do. I build leaders, and I got recognized for that. And so
yeah,
here's what my off point is. Here's what I can do for you, right? And every business leader, out there, and you've been a hiring leader at some point. You want people who are committed to the business. You want people who are aligned with the mission. You want people who are going to work the business, like work on the business, not just somebody who's looking for a job, right? A 9 to 5 or an 8 to 5 or what have you, and just looking to get a paycheck. You're looking for people who are ready to partner for the business, do the work for the business, do what's necessary for the business. And that's really the mindset that, really the shift in mindset of what I'm going for, what I'm helping people facilitate, or what I'm helping facilitate in people when they go through job search masteries, to move away from the typical conversation, typical understanding of what we have about job search and recruitment, and trying to show that you're the best person, and you know
yep,
all that stuff. And it's not really about that. It's not even about doing a skill set match, not even doing about qualifications match. I mean, that's still all important, but what it really is comes down to, job search is really about business and people,
yes,
right? It's ultimately about what the group wants to achieve, what the leader wants to achieve. It's about them looking and saying, is this somebody who we can bring into our family circle, right? And who's going to help be a net positive addition, right? Are we going to do bigger, better things with, say, with Rick in our team, than if he wasn't in our team, right? And once you kind of get past those objections, get them to see that, then it's a runway train. It's offered. It's like, you move to the next level. Get past the job search. So we're beyond the typical customizing your application, customizing resumes, customizing cover letters and stuff. Still all very important things to do, but to keep in focus that this is the real core um, um, point of job search is really it's about business and people, right? And when you understand that, then it can kind of help you understand what do you need to understand about yourself? How do you communicate about you? What do you need to understand about the people who you are going to be approaching? And what will resonate with them? What will get them excited? What will get their imagination going, right? Kind of like how you figured out, right? So you've had a number of interviews throughout your job search, right?
Right.
Like you've
Yes.
had many meetings, many conversations with hiring leaders and what have you. And I know there's a lot of job search advice out there that career experts and folks will tell people, and it's good advice. But one perspective that maybe you can shed into that, or you can add to that conversation, is from your perspective, what were some of the things that you learned that hiring leaders really think about, and what their focus is really on, right? Because in interviews, it's very common to understand that, oh, it's all about answering behavioral questions, right? And
Right.
yeah, you need to have some skill in answering behavioral questions, because that does provide some insight and information into the candidate. But from your perspective, what did you find hiring leaders really wanted to understand about you?
Well, yeah, and that it's kind of specific to my case
Yeah.
because I'm an operations leader. And so they had to understand that that was a common thread throughout my career. And then I walked them through my resume and how I had a leadership role at every position I had.
Yeah.
Even if I wasn't the hiring or firing person like at Alltech, I still directed maintenance guys in their in the morning, gave them their work orders and
Okay.
headed them out to what they had to do. And then the plant manager would get my opinion on the skill set of each and where I saw them,
Yeah.
as he was trying to figure out their evaluation for the year. So there was still input there in any position I held.
Yeah.
But the key was to get that operation leadership through the hiring manager. But then, the flipping point was, particularly if I had the plant manager or um, a, a, a manager that looks to the future, was
Mhm.
getting them to see that all tech experience where the new plant manager came in and took me from a maintenance coordinator to a project manager because he saw my skill set and recognized my ability to communicate with corporate and to put things on paper to bring the project costs together and
Mhm.
get that proposal made and get it approved, and then once approved to follow it through. So once I brought that across, that's when I could start see the wheels turning. um and also that conviction that if something happened, I could step in
Mhm.
and take over if need be, or they could pull me from what position they had and use me elsewhere in that facility. Once did that, and you could see that in their expression,
Mhm.
they were thinking about, yeah, we could do this, we could do that. Then the conviction was there.
Yeah.
That was moving to the next level then.
So if you were to put a percentage on the number or the amount of time you answered behavioral questions in interviews, what percentage? Like, give it a range, like in your interviews.
And that's an interesting thing too. Now that you brought that up, I started thinking about it while you were talking. Is in the beginning, when I started this job search thing back at when the plant closed at Alltech,
Yeah.
even before we met, behavioral questions were probably, I'm thinking 80 or 90% type
Hmm.
level. Once I've made the switch and presented myself differently, it was more of a conversation. It, the behavioral questions, some of them said, I got to ask this because I do this with every candidate.
Yeah.
And they would, go through and usually like one or two questions, and they kind of threw their piece of paper away, and we just started having general discussions. So that was an interesting switch in,
So,
go ahead.
so just to be clear, what, like you said, once you presented yourself differently, what helped you present yourself differently?
I think that was my conviction that I'm operations leader.
Okay.
And so, almost every interview starts off, walk me through your resume.
Yes.
So when I walked them through my resume, I was focusing specifically on operations leadership.
Yeah.
And how I did that at each job. Where before I was just kind of going, well, I did this at the shipyard. I did this in my lawn care business.
Yeah.
I wasn't focusing on the leadership role. And so by changing the focus to the operations leadership,
Yeah.
that changed the focus of the interview.
Yeah.
And then the next typical question would be, well, tell me about your management style. And, I could walk them through each job again, that it was hands-on.
Yeah.
And I'm a hands-on manager, but also would tell my mom's story.
Yeah.
And how I got the award for developing people.
Yeah.
And usually after that, it was just, let's have a discussion. And, they kind of got off the path of the typical questions.
Right. So once you had clarity and some organized understanding of what your main marketing messages are, and you've had you have your clear um, uh, evidence and stories, and
Mm-hmm.
right, you understand what you have essentially to be able to explain and express and demonstrate those messages. Um, that helped shift the conversation away from your typical behavioral style questions. It's interesting you mentioned that, because like you experienced, right? Like when they ask, the typical behavioral questions happen when they are trying to better understand you,
Yeah.
right? So if I can add a little bit more expert opinion on that, um, in any interview, they're just trying to get a better understanding of who you are, right? Now, the work, the only difference is who does the work, who does the heavy weight of that lifting, because the lifting has to happen. So who does the heavy lifting, right? Is it you in advance, or is it them in the interview, right? And so them in the interview is, them, they're going to get into behavioral questions. They're going to ask you about specific instances and certain things and what have you. The risk with that is that you can give the answers, but they make up a picture, a perception of who you are and the value you have to offer. And that will almost always be less than what you will always be, right? That will never be over what who you are and what have you. They will never overestimate and over evaluate you, right? Like, or
Right.
anyone. They will always go underestimate, because there's risk there. If you walk in with lack of clarity, there's risk there for them. They're going to understand. They're going to try to pull out as much information through behavioral questions. And that's what's going to help them understand and formulate a picture of who you are and what you will mean for them in that role. But when you do the work, when you've done the heavy lifting, when you've done all the pages and pages, and done the reflection, done the right things, and gotten yourself clear about who you are, and really organized all of your experiences, all these disparate experiences and the things that you've done, and really pull it together or put it into some organized marketing structure, then you're basically leading the conversation, right? And like you said, it switches over to conversation, and it's like, help me understand, tell me, walk me through this. And it's like, okay, well, so you're sitting there, you're helping them understand what you have to offer, and that gives them the opportunity to say, I could really use you here, I could really use you there, this is really good, we could do many things. And that's where you want to be, that's where you want the conversation to go, right?
Yeah.
Now we do
Yeah,
have to.
it's kind of interesting because it switches from those behavioral questions um, to now the interviewer is telling you more about the plant, what's going on there, and some of the issues they're having, and how they perceive that they could use you, or they're how they need help in some area.
They're probably
And
even asking for advice
yeah. So
because
it's really interesting how that mindset switches in the interview at that point.
yeah,
And until this past week, I don't think I had gotten to that level
right.
where I was getting that conviction and turning. Looking back at my previous interviews, I came in second like 5 times,
Right.
and I think those I pretty much stayed with the behavioral questions. I didn't do a good job of selling that leadership and building that conviction. And I could really see it this past week in this with the 2 offers I got in the
Yeah.
faces of the people across the table.
Because
Where
you,
that switch occurred. It
yeah,
was like all of a sudden we just went from the blah blah interview
yeah.
to a discussion and what's going to happen.
What's going to happen? Yeah. And you even mentioned that you, after the interview, you came home and you mentioned to your wife, you're like, that was weird.
Yeah. And I couldn't. I told her, I said I couldn't read him. And now that I look back at it,
Yeah.
it was because this transformation had occurred. I couldn't read him because he was thinking about, wow, I could do this with him. I could, I got these possibilities. That
Yeah.
was the look.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like a poker face. But
Yeah.
now that I look back on it and know what's going on, that
Yeah.
wasn't a poker face. He was in deep thought
Isn't
of,
it thought? Yeah.
of what else could happen if they brought me aboard.
Yeah. And this is, you know, this company that they hired, who hired you,
Mm-hmm.
they're,
CTI Foods. Yeah.
yeah, like I said, I mean, they're in for a treat. I
Yeah.
know you've been at this for a while, and you're going to put your heart and soul into this, and they're in for a treat as to what it is that they can really do and achieve with you. And I really want to reiterate, like, we're not talking about pulling any psychological tricks, using any manipulative techniques and what have you. This is
Not at all.
pure
Yeah.
authenticity,
Yeah.
authentic congruency in your marketing, in your expressing who you are, because that's what people will respond to, especially leaders. And you're dealing with very intelligent people, obviously, right? I mean, you're dealing with smart people, sophisticated people. As I keep talking about in Job Search Mastery, it's like these are people who are sophisticated, and they can read in authenticity, they can read incongruency, they can read fake puff confidence, they can read all of that, and they can see through it, right? And they can see through lies, they can see through manipulation, they can see through conning and what have you. And so that's why it never is useful or beneficial to do any of that. But unfortunately, if you don't go through the exercise of getting clear on your value, you at some point feel like you have to resort to those sort of tactics to be able to get anywhere, right? Because if you're
Yeah.
not feeling any progress, then it's like, well, I'm just going to make stuff up, right? And unfortunately, some people do that to their own detriment. So if they're listening, it's just reflection, personal reflection, getting clear on your value, getting clear on what are you, just even looking through your entire life and seeing, okay, what are some of the emerging themes from everything that I've been through. That's a great, fantastic start to understanding, okay, what am I really selling? What am I really promoting, putting in front of the hiring leaders to say, okay, well, there's something here, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and it's important too, like, you're not just telling the story, you're reliving it when you're telling the story. You draw from that emotion
yeah,
of that point in your life. And, there was times I got sort of choked up talking about my mom. But when I got to the point where I got the award for developing my leadership, it's the emotion came through of success and
Yeah.
being recognized by my peers for my leadership abilities. And they can read that emotion, and they understand, wow, this is an honest, passionate story that, like you said, it's not something this guy just made up to tell us today.
No.
He lived it. He was there. He did
Yeah.
it.
And sometimes it's very difficult to tell personal stories,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I mean, you
Yeah.
think that, oh no, I got to keep it professional. I got to keep it right. I got to keep it 100%
Yeah.
professional. Like you know, I shared one time when I was sitting, when I was sitting in a room full of board like directors in a boardroom, and this was after my MBA, and you know, I had a 1 hour meeting with them. This is my first time meeting them. I've been uh, what do you call? Uh, I've been introduced to them
Mm-hmm.
by their boss, who was the executive vice president in the company division, and this was her way of saying, "Please meet this individual. Please meet Amir." I was telling her team, "Please meet Amir and talk to him." Right? I'll talk to him about just get to know him. And I went there. And one of the stories I told them, and I left there with, was how I basically was laid off from a company where I first started my job in, but in effect, I should have been fired, right? Because of whatever reasons, the attitude and what have you, right? I should have been
I
fired.
remember that
And
story.
and this is something you don't talk, you like, it's so counterintuitive. You don't talk about your failings and the hard parts and the less than shiny parts of your career. You don't talk about that with leaders, especially in an interview setting. I wasn't in an interview setting, but I sort of knew it was an interview, right? But all the directors, they sort of leaned in, right? They're like, okay, you almost got fired. Okay, so they want to know more, right? But that's the magic of being able to tell your story effectively, but having a strategy behind your stories. And I did. I had a strategy behind that story, and sure enough, at the end of the interview, I had a job offer. They created that job for me. But that's the power of having the ability to express yourself and express your story, all sides, not just the great parts, not just the shiny parts, but also those less than shiny parts, the parts that are personal to you, right? Those are the stories, because everybody has that. I don't care. I mean, Steve Jobs was fired from his own company, right? I mean, anyone you look at, everyone has had moments that were difficult, that were personal, right? Not great, not high points in their career, but we've all had that. I don't care who you are, everyone has had that. But when you share your story in a very in a way that gets people to understand who you are, not in a manipulative, but really who you are, what you have to offer, that moves people, right?
Yeah.
And that gets people to really understand and just understand, okay, I know who I'm sitting in front of. This is not just a resume. This is not just just an engineer. This is not just another plant manager. This is not just another project manager. This is Rick, right?
Yeah.
This is Rick is a lot of things now. In my mind, Rick is a lot of things, not just somebody who comes in with a project management experience, right? Like, so you go from being a piece of paper and resume and some skill sets and qualifications to a human being in front of them. And that's the real magic of being able to really understand who you are and express your stories and share your stories in a way that educates people and brings them up to speed as to who you are and what you have to offer them.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned to me in our communication back and forth was you really resonated with my story.
Yes.
Like the time when I was sitting in the stairwell,
Yes.
right? If people want to know what my story is, they can go check out my website and what have you. But I share my story of how I struggled after my MBA, trying to land a job, and I had applied for jobs, wasn't getting any. Then I was sitting in the stairwell, middle of the night, head hanging low, going, "What is going on here?" And you connected with that. So I want, like, there are low points that we all face in our career or in our job search. And anyone, like you said, job search is no fun. I want you to kind of maybe share your experience and maybe some words of advice on how to make it through those low points? What did you do to help you get through those low points?
Well, that's, yeah, and that's a tough one because the job search is brutal on your own psyche. Um, the rejection letters, I mean, not even the courtesy of a phone call. Oh, great resume, great, you have great skills, we love you, but sorry, we're moving on with another candidate. There's one company I went through 6 interviews with, and they said they've moved on with another candidate, and here 7 months later, they're still advertising the 2 positions I interviewed for.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, really? Here's somebody sitting here with more than enough skills to do that position. And now I may know that their rejection is because they feared I'd lose or leave. I mean, so who knows what their rejection, their psyche is on that one.
Yeah.
But, you just sit there and you're like, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? So that starts eating away with you. And there's so much noise out there, and LinkedIn has its good points, but a lot of bad points. You have people, trying to get you to buy their resume skills, and trying to sell you this and say that, and you're like, I'm sitting here, I'm unemployed. I don't have the money to spend on this.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're all, giving you opinions. They all have the opinions. The networking, I agree that's important, but it's only just a part of the game. But of course they say that, so they want you to stay on LinkedIn. And I think LinkedIn likes it when they say those kind of things. So it sells LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
So you get just caught up in this muck, and you feel like you're drowning at times, and you want to scream for help. And the big thing is to understand a lot of it's not personal. You got this HR person sitting in an office, and I'm sure I've heard stories where they get 300 applications for certain jobs,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure it depends on the skill level, how many they're getting in there. So I know they're probably overwhelmed. There's their side of the story as well. And you just got to keep that mindset that you're one of how many applicants trying to get that position, and to even overcome that just to get an interview is a small step of success. And then if you get an interview and you're moving through the interviews, those are steps of success.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately you get that rejection.
Yeah.
It almost wipes out all those successes you made, but you got to stay focused on those successes and those small steps that you made. And for me, that's what I kept focus on, was I could look back at all those interviews, the 5 times runner up, and I thought it was 6, but apparently the one I'm still in the game,
Yeah.
even though I've taken another position now. But
Right.
so I'm like, man, I've been to the finalist 5 times now, and they picked the other person. I'm like, what is wrong with me? You always take it personal. And in each occasion, I could see where they possibly picked the other person because of one tiny little skill set that I didn't have, or they had some experience in that industry that I didn't have.
Right.
And that was just the tipping point, but I didn't build that conviction at that point either. And
Build that conviction in them or in you?
in them.
Okay.
So
Because that's something that we talk about in Job Search Mastery is
yeah,
you've got to take them to that point of conviction.
yeah,
They're like, no, this is the person. Rick is
that's
the
it.
person,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But even though you know what to do, doesn't necessarily mean you are able to do that. I've failed on
Yes.
doing that many, many times myself, even after knowing what to do. But I just wanted to make sure, just so people understand. Yeah.
And sometimes you need those failures.
Thank you.
So understand
Yeah.
that it's like Edison the light bulb. He had what 1,000 times he failed, and then he finally made a light bulb. So
Yes.
you kind of needed those interviews and those failures to say, okay, I do need to tweak this. And once, I got that conviction and went through my resume with the leadership focus every time.
Yeah.
And then, the story getting the award for leadership, building leaders. Once I had that going on, that was a total game changer. And, hence this past week with the 2 offers.
With the 2 offers. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's, you know, the thing that people, I want them to really get from what your journey has been is, the way to stay motivated and the way to stay engaged is to really focus on the small wins, right? The
Right.
small steps, small progressive steps.
Right.
Because anytime you meet someone, anytime you have an interview, anytime you catch somebody's attention, like you said, they get so many applications, but if they catch if you catch their attention, that's you waded through all those other resumes and you
Yeah.
stood out, right? So that is a small step.
And to build on this, the job I did get,
Yeah.
I started with them 4 years ago, trying to get in the door.
Okay.
When I was laid off at Alltech with the plant closure.
Yeah.
And I had a phone interview with them, and I had applied for a shift supervisor, production supervisor position. Well, she called and said, well, that's been filled.
Yeah.
But what about third shift maintenance supervisor position? And at that point in my life, I was just coming out of the maintenance coordinator ordeal at Alltech, and I was like, I really don't want to get back into maintenance and really don't want to work third shift.
What's third
So
shift, by the way?
third shift?
Yeah.
That's like from midnight to 6 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Okay.
well,
Yes.
yeah, 11 at night till 7 in the morning, 8 hours.
Right.
But anyhow, yeah, you're working through the dead of the night.
Yeah.
I did that at the shipyard, and it did not sit well with me.
Yeah.
And so I knew that. And so I kind of rejected that.
Okay.
Well, then, later on, after wasn't getting jobs, I again approached this company about a position. They were having an open house. Pretty much told at the door, well, we don't have anything for your skill set. You really don't want to work here. And the HR person, who's no longer there, told me that, it is a food production facility, and they're like, oh, there's blood all over the floor, and they, it's cold, and they painted a horrible picture of the business. And I was there with a friend of mine who was also laid off at Alltech, and we looked at each other like, what was that all about? That was very weird.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, they had like 60 openings, and here the 2 people are standing in front of them, and they pretty much tell them, run away from here,
Right.
So, and then when Green Horse went, I again applied for a production supervisor position. And oddly enough, I get a phone call again saying, well, we filled the position, but we possibly have a maintenance. And, same phone call I had 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But this time I was like, okay, yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah.
And I didn't get an interview, but the gentleman called me in for a plant tour. And he specifically said, this isn't an interview. It's just to get to know you, and I'll give you a plant tour. And we spent like 2 hours together. Well, nothing came out of that. That was last summer. Nothing. He didn't even get invited in for the maintenance position. Nothing. Okay. Once I see him again, I'm going to have to ask him.
Yeah. What happened?
What happened there? But what's very interesting is I finally get called in for the ship supervisor position, and I had a phone interview with the managers.
Okay.
And right after that interview, that gentleman I had talked to during the summer and gave me a plant tour texts me and say, hey, they asked me about this position, and I put in a great um, response for you, a recommendation for you.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. I'd never heard from this guy again. And then
Right.
now I interviewed for this position. He's going to bat for me.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. And then, of course, I saw him again when I was on site for the interview. And he's like, you got my text right? And I'm like, yes, sir. Thank you. And right in front of the plant manager, he's like, good,
Yeah.
And so even though what I perceived as a setback last
Right.
summer and the years before, now it's all, I overcame all those.
Yeah.
I kept at it, kept focused, because this company's on literally 15-minute drive from my house,
Yeah.
and secured the job this time.
Look at that. Look at
Yeah.
that. So it's all progress. And
Yes.
any amount of, like, it's all a little bit of progress. And so we're not just waiting for the big win. We're not just waiting for the interview or the offer, right? It's all
Yeah.
progress. And even when you get the offer, that's just day one, right?
Right.
That's just day one. We're still the show is really starting then, so to speak. So I want to make sure that I'm conscious of your time here. So we talked about, how do you get over the low points, is to really focus on the progress, the small steps, the progress and stuff. Now, I also want to make sure that we recognize, like, I know you, when you were in your job search, obviously you bought into my program, and we communicated once in a while, worked on your resume, had a few Zoom calls. I kind of helped you with a few things, but I wasn't the only one in your journey. There were other folks who helped you, or who you sought inspiration from and advice from, throughout your journey. So it'd be unfair to not recognize them and give them at least a quick shout out. So is there anyone in your mind, or anyone who comes to mind, who really helped you with your in your journey, in your job search journey?
Well, and sometimes during those low points, there was one particular person, Kurtzy Bonner. She would make posts um, about job search and give maybe like 5 or 10 points, things you should be doing. And, great advice, and didn't expect anything in return. Just a free post on LinkedIn. Here's my advice. And, people would respond. And so the thread was also very good
Right.
in her post. And, unfortunately, she took her life.
Kirsty Bonner, right? Like, she
Yes.
she passed away. Um,
And, but there was an unselfish person on LinkedIn
yeah,
that, um, that I think really helped a lot of people with her post.
with her posts. Yeah.
And there's other people on LinkedIn. I think it's a personality thing,
Hmm.
uh, you know, very much so, that you have to connect with those people that give some good advice. I didn't connect like I did with you with them. Um, the one thing I would just really tell people is there's a lot of noise on LinkedIn. Um, they'll have you going in different directions,
Yeah.
and so it's really best to find one person you connect with.
Yeah.
And I really think it is best, like, you had a story to tell. You were in the trenches.
Right.
You've been there and done that, so you understand what a person like me was going through.
Yeah.
And to me, and it doesn't have to be you they follow. You hope that it is.
Yeah.
But to me, I think those two things are very important, that you have to connect with the person, and and they should have been in the trenches.
Right.
If they hadn't been in the trenches, don't follow them. Don't, because they're just going through the same spiel that they learned at some coaching school, or they just copied off of LinkedIn from other people.
Right.
And they'll have you just running in circles and collect your money.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've heard horror stories myself, and I try to do my best to whoever's, kind of ends up feeling like they got taken advantage of. So
Yes.
I do my part to help fix, because I think at the core of it, everyone means well.
Yes.
People, they mean well. It's just maybe the uh, you know like you said, when you've been through the trenches, and you have people who genuinely have made a conscious decision to help folks in this particular position, because they know what it's like, they know what they've been through and stuff, and there's more people like me out there. I'm not the only one. There's lots of folks who've been through rough points in their career and have turned it around for themselves, and they can be of value and be of help. um, and so there's lots of folks, but like you said, there's also a lot of noise. But it's important that we send a shout out to Kirsty Bonner, because again, like you mentioned, she's somebody who would write posts, and that helped you carry along yourself, helped you get through your low
Yeah.
points, maybe give you some new ideas, new ways to think about and stuff. And so really, shout out to Kirsty Bonner. It's a huge loss to all of us who, I didn't necessarily follow her per se, but I did see her posts every once in a while, and I was in awe. Like, she shared really good, valuable information.
Yes.
And so I looked at it and I was like, this is somebody who's, like you said, selfless. So big shout out to Kirsty Bonner. So one more thing that before we end our conversation, you talked about LinkedIn. So there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of activity on LinkedIn and what have you, and I looked through your profile. I looked through all the posts that you had on LinkedIn. You were quite heavily active on LinkedIn, posting, commenting, and what have you. And for folks who are looking to, or trying to figure out, what they should do on LinkedIn, what advice do you have in terms of what you should do on LinkedIn, and how effective that was for you in your journey?
Well, for me, it's kind of a different story because I was looking local. I didn't want to relocate. We love where we live. Um, so for me, even though I was very active and posting a lot, I can't say I benefited. And I don't know how much I benefited. Maybe being on there, I did more so than I know.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're really looking to relocate, if you're okay with relocating, I think it is very important, and particularly focusing on what skill you're hoping to be hired. So, if you get that focus, in my case, the leadership,
Mm-hmm.
I would focus more on leadership type post,
Mm-hmm.
or and those kind of or advice on leadership
Yeah.
type things, and so people could see the value in you, and maybe even your stories, post your stories.
I noticed you did that. I was going to ask you about that. You posted some stories of you, of your experiences, past experiences, especially the one story about when you made that switch to your lawn care business, and after having knocked on the door and being being told to leave in very colorful language
Yes.
because you interrupted a football game or something like that.
Yes.
You went home and you're like, what did I do? I just put our investments all into this business. Oh my God. And then 13 years later, you got an award.
Yeah.
But that was a great story where where you shared like a rather personal moment for you.
Mhm.
And, people struggle with that. People struggle with being
Yes.
that open and that vulnerable and sharing a personal story like that. But did you find that sharing that story um, helped you connect with anyone per se? Did that the story do anything for you on LinkedIn?
And that's where it's kind of hard to know the value of something like that, because, you get likes and some, comments. So you don't know what value that may be down the road,
Yeah.
you know. So, but you are getting people to know you personally. And when you tell a story like that, I wanted the people to see my grit, that I'm a person that, overcomes difficult times.
Yeah.
And, that one day, I was just knocked down, beaten up, went
Yeah.
home with my tail between my legs and thought I'd just thrown away our life savings, and woke up the next morning and went right back at it, and shook it off and continued, and 13 years later get Franchise of the Year award.
Yeah.
So it's, I wanted that to get out there. So hopefully if a hiring manager or somebody did do their research and looked at, my thread online,
Yeah.
they got that personal insight of me.
Yeah. And I would, that's a great story to have on your posts, on your on your profile. When somebody looks at your posts, looks at all your activity, they can see your posts, your past work, your past comments, anything that you've done in the past on LinkedIn. So this is something that's great to have on your LinkedIn profile. Per se. So I wouldn't delete it. I wouldn't get rid of it. It's a great little story for people to get to know you. But it's going to happen because, the more you work, you get to know people around in your local community, and should they be curious about you, and they hop on LinkedIn, then they see this, then they know, they just get a better appreciation for who you are. But it is a struggle trying to, putting your story on LinkedIn and broadcasting it to the world, and not necessarily having people really respond to it, so to
Right.
speak. So it's two things. One is you're not doing it for the likes, but what you've done is you've put an asset in place that when somebody is curious about you, they'll come looking for you, and they're curious and they want to learn more about you. They'll see that story. They get a better appreciation for who you are beyond just what you say on your LinkedIn profile, right?
Right.
So it's a great little story. But these are people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or whoever is in their job search, and they're trying to figure out what they need to do on LinkedIn. Some people are even very concerned about doing anything on LinkedIn. And because they don't believe people really pay attention on LinkedIn. I mean, obviously when you're doing this, when you went through this, you knew for a fact that hiring leaders don't look on LinkedIn, right?
Right.
It's the recruiters, it's the HR folks, they look on LinkedIn, right? And they use LinkedIn very actively because they're tasked to find the talent.
Right.
And unfortunately, if that's where you share most of your stories, all the stuff about you that is beyond just the hard skill sets and qualifications that they're looking for, it sort of falls on deaf ears, right?
Right.
So it's very important to have to have it really well organized, but to have that personal connection, to go and meet with people, to use job interviews as a vehicle to have those conversations, to flip things, to flip the script, and have a more meaningful conversation, being able to walk them through and help them understand, this is what we have in front of us. It's an opportunity. And really approach every conversation from that point. Last thing before we end, from everything that you've learned from me and in job search mastery and stuff, it's not necessarily a one-time deal just to help you with your immediate job search. I hope you see that and you understand that. But from everything that we've talked about in terms of focus, in terms of marketing, in terms of the accomplishments and your stories and your value proposition and all these things that we went through, how do you believe this is going to help you going forward in terms of what you do in the company that you've been hired in, and how do you position yourself for growth within that company? Is it going to change how you operate?
Yes and no, because I'm a person that gets results anyhow. But like the rewriting of my resume and putting those bullets on there, showing my results when I'm there, that's now in the back of my mind. that, okay, this, what I'm doing here could be a bullet on my resume.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, and I kind of hope I don't have to use it again. I hope that I've found my career job.
Yeah.
Um, but particularly for younger people, or even in your 40s, and 50, people need to understand, once you hit that 50, you're starting to get into that older mindset in the HR's for mindset.
Yeah.
But that's one thing, is think about what you're doing and how it's going to be a bullet on your resume. Your stories, that's another thing
Yes.
that's in the back of my mind now. Like something, of course, landing this job and having 2 offers within 72 hours, and possibly moving forward with 2 or 3 other companies in the background.
Yeah.
And how that all evolved in like 1 week's time.
Yeah.
That's a story that's going to stick with me,
Yeah.
from here on forward, and how that change in mindset and that switch occurred.
That's what, yeah.
So those kind of things would, always think about your stories. I have my stories all written down now. I've
Yeah.
got them in my notebook that's this thick.
I know. I just want to show folks, this is what I have. That's that's just some of it that I just printed in really
Yeah, I was
small.
gonna say, you don't have them all, I don't think.
Oh, I'm sure I don't. I'm sure I don't. But see, that the wonderful thing is that now that you've gotten your messaging aligned and your evidence organized, and the switch in mindset, the just a bit of coaching, like this one position is not the end point, right? It's an entry point, and like you said, you want to grow with the organization, and you want to have more of a foothold and have more of an impactful role inside this organization. So it's all going to be about, and as you're accomplishing, as you're delivering results and what have you, what you're going to find is that the leaders are going to be very interested in who you are as you're delivering, as you're surprising them, as you're wowing them with what you do. They're going to get very curious about you. And so the goal, like now that you've got your foothold, like I said, this is day one. But in terms of the rest of your time and your career progression, yes, you're 60, but your career is still going to progress. You're still, as long as if you're not the CEO of the organization, there's lots of room to grow, right? Not saying that that's where you want to go, but the point is that what you want your growth is, how much more of an impact can I have in the organization? How much more can you trust me with? How much more can I deliver? That's really the growth trajectory. And the goal is, now that you've gone inside the company, now that you've entered inside the company, now you're working inside this organization, the goal is really to build sponsors, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're still working to create that conviction, because the leaders, I mean, you may have created conviction inside the one hiring leader who hired you, but there's a huge leadership team out there who's yet doesn't know you, they don't know you, they don't understand the full value. So they're going to find there's going to be lots of opportunities for you to have conversations, share your stories, same stories that you share in your interview, share your stories with them. Build that conviction that, you know what, you are somebody who they can trust and they can value inside their organization. And then what happens, what comes out of it, is really opportunities that you don't know, but are swimming inside the minds of this leadership team, right? They have aspirations they may have not shared with people. They have thoughts and ideas and visions of where they want to go and what have you, but they may not have the confidence that they found the right people to be able to help them actualize those visions, actualize those aspirations. So when you're sharing your stories with them, when they get to understand, Rick, this is who you are. For all we know, all those aspirations could come into actualization. They're like, you know what? Okay, we need to do this. We need to do that. We need to do it. Before you know it, your role could morph, just like it did in Alltech, just like it does for my other students, my other clients. They're the minute they have conversations, the more conversations you have, the more opportunities open up. And so I really hope that you continue. Like Job Search Mastery does help you get into your, help you create a conviction, help you get the enthusiastic job offers, but the work doesn't stop there, because the real goal is career growth. The real goal is projection, the real, or progression, right? The real goal is for you to be able to make the impact that you want to make, right? For you to
Yes.
maximize your value, maximize what you can do. And, all the things that we talked about, all the things that we learned in Job Search Mastery, that's still relevant, still use it. And you know what, I can't wait to hear what more you're doing and what more you're accomplishing. I'm sure these guys are just going to look and be tickled pink having you in their team. So really appreciate you taking time to talk to me about your experience and share your advice and your story with the folks. Any last parting words before we go?
I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate all you've done for me, Amir. You were there, with your course. You've been there afterwards, through my ups and downs, and you were always available, and I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. It's been an honor being a part of your journey and really getting to know you and seeing, it's a personal, this is one of those moments of grace where I look and I see, you know what, I've played a small part in helping you get to the companies, get people to recognize and see the value in you. That's greater than anything that, I or any career coach could do in terms of, right, giving you the skills and abilities. This is purely a moment of grace, and I'm just honored to be a part of it. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey. And, like I said, we're going to continue our conversations.